Dr. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she entered the euthanasia room, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the sterile tiles. Two German shepherds lay motionless on the cold steel table, their massive bodies intertwined in what appeared to be their final embrace. The larger dog, Atlas, had draped his scarred paw protectively over the smaller one, Storm, whose labored breathing echoed through the silent room. As Sarah approached with the prepared syringe, Atlas's amber eyes snapped open, fixing her with an intense stare that seemed to pierce through her professional detachment. Without moving his body, he pulled Storm closer, and in that moment something extraordinary happened. Storm's ragged breathing suddenly steadied, becoming deep and rhythmic. Sarah froze, the syringe suspended in midair. Storm's eyes fluttered open, and she swore she saw tears pooling in their depths. When she gently tried to separate them to administer the injection, Storm's breathing immediately became erratic again, his body convulsing with each desperate gasp. "My God," Sarah whispered, her voice catching. Something impossible was happening before her eyes. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had always been drawn to animals in need. Her 20-year career as a veterinarian stemmed from a childhood trauma, losing her beloved German shepherd, Rex, when her family fell on hard times. That wound never fully healed, making today's task even more unbearable. The Hope Animal Shelter, where she'd worked for the past 5 years, had seen its share of difficult cases, but few hit her as hard as the 2 German shepherds, scheduled for euthanasia. As Sarah reviewed their files, their story unfolded like a tragic novel. Atlas, the larger dog, approximately 6 years old, carried himself with dignified bearing despite his condition. A distinctive scar across his left shoulder hinted at a violent past. His amber eyes held an intelligence that unsettled Sarah, as if he understood exactly what was happening around him. The smaller dog, Storm, appeared to be slightly younger, perhaps 5 years old. Where Atlas was watchful and protective, Storm seemed resigned, his breathing labored, his once lustrous coat dulled by illness. The bond between them was immediately apparent to anyone who observed them for more than a few moments. They were always touching, always aware of each other's presence. Richard Hayes, the shelter's director, had been adamant about today's schedule. "We're overcrowded, Dr. Mitchell," he'd reminded her yesterday, his thin lips barely moving as he spoke. "Resources are limited. These dogs haven't responded to treatment, and we need the space." Sarah recognized the cold calculation in Richard's pale blue eyes. To him, the animals were entries in a ledger, problems to be solved efficiently. At 58, he'd been running the shelter for 15 years with businesslike precision that often clashed with Sarah's more compassionate approach. Maria Sanchez, a younger shelter worker with boundless empathy, had been the one to discover the dogs 3 months ago. "They were near the Buddhist temple on Elm Street," she'd told Sarah, her hazel eyes wide with concern. "The nuns said they'd been hanging around for days, looking half-starved. The bigger one wouldn't let anyone near the little one at first." What struck everyone was how the dogs stayed pressed together at all times. In the kennel, during examinations, even when offered food, they maintained physical contact as if separation might destroy them both. Now, as Sarah gathered her supplies for the morning's grim task, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about these two, something she was missing, but the shelter's policy was clear, and her professional duty unavoidable. The dogs who had survived abandonment, starvation, and illness together would face their final journey the same way, side by side, arm retrieved. Sarah's footsteps echoed down the quiet corridor as she approached the kennel area. The Monday morning sunshine streamed through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden beams, belying the heaviness in her heart. She clutched the medical bag in one hand, euthanasia paperwork in the other, each step feeling like she was wading through molasses. "Good morning, Dr. Mitchell," called the night attendant, gathering his belongings to leave. "Everything's been quiet. Those two German shepherds you're seeing today are in the back kennel, still together, of course." He hesitated, then added softly, "They seem to know something's happening, haven't touched their breakfast." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. The shelter housed dozens of animals, many with sad stories, but something about Atlas and Storm had touched everyone who worked with them. Their silent devotion to each other in the face of abandonment and illness spoke of a bond that transcended ordinary animal companionship. As she rounded the corner to the isolation kennel, she saw Maria already there. The young woman was crouched outside the kennel, speaking softly to the dogs. "I can't help feeling we're missing something," Maria said without looking up as Sarah approached. "Last night Storm's breathing was better when I checked on them. Maybe the antibiotics are finally working?" Sarah knelt beside her, studying the two German shepherds through the chain-link door. Atlas lay curled around Storm, his larger body forming a protective crescent. Storm's head rested on Atlas's foreleg, his eyes closed but his chest rising with more regularity than Sarah had observed previously. "It's probably just temporary improvement," Sarah replied gently. "We've seen that before, brief rallies before the end." She hated the clinical coldness of her own words, but false hope served no one. "The lab work confirms the infection has spread to his bloodstream. His organs are beginning to fail." Maria wiped a tear from her cheek. "I know. It's just, they've been through so much together, surviving on the streets, finding their way here, and Atlas won't leave his side, not for a second. It's like he knows." "Animals often sense when the end is near," Sarah said, unlocking the kennel door. "It's time, Maria. Richard was clear that this needed to be done today." Atlas raised his head as the door swung open, his amber eyes tracking Sarah's every movement. He didn't growl or show aggression, but his body tensed, pressing closer to Storm. Sarah entered slowly, setting her medical bag on the floor. The protocol was straightforward. Separate the dogs, administer the solution to Storm first, then Atlas. Quick, painless, professional. She'd done it dozens of times for animals suffering without hope of recovery. This shouldn't be different. But it was. As she reached for Storm, Atlas shifted his position, placing his scarred shoulder between Sarah and his companion. Not threatening, not aggressive, just firmly protective. "Atlas," Sarah said softly, using his name to establish connection, "I need to help Storm now." Something in the dog's eyes, an intelligence, a sorrow, a plea, made Sarah pause. She'd seen many expressions in animals' eyes over her career, but never one that communicated so clearly, "Don't separate us." She changed tactics, sitting on the kennel floor instead, giving the dog space. This wasn't the protocol, but something told her to wait, to observe. Storm stirred slightly, his breathing still labored but noticeably steadier than it had been during yesterday's examination. His brown eyes opened briefly, meeting Sarah's gaze, before closing again in apparent exhaustion. "Let me try something," Sarah said to Maria, who remained at the kennel door. "Get me the stethoscope from my bag." Maria complied, watching curiously as Sarah gently placed the stethoscope on Storm's chest, listening intently. Atlas remained vigilant but allowed the examination, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "His lung sounds are clearer," Sarah noted with surprise. "Not normal, but definitely improved from yesterday." She continued her examination, checking Storm's gums, his temperature, his pulse. Each metric showed slight improvement, not enough to indicate recovery, but enough to raise questions about their decision. "What does it mean?" Maria asked, hopefully. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "It could be temporary, but—" She sat back on her heels, watching how Atlas adjusted his position whenever she moved, maintaining constant contact with Storm. An idea began to form in her mind. "Let's try an experiment," she said. "Help me move Storm just a few feet away from Atlas." Together they carefully lifted Storm, who was too weak to resist, and placed him on a clean blanket about 3 feet from Atlas. The reaction was immediate. Atlas whined anxiously, trying to reach his companion. More significantly, within moments, Storm's breathing became more labored, his body trembling. "Look at his vitals," Sarah said, watching the rapid deterioration. "His heart rate is climbing, oxygen saturation dropping." They quickly returned Storm to his original position beside Atlas. Almost immediately, Storm's breathing steadied again as Atlas curled protectively around him. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Maria. "It's like Atlas is somehow stabilizing him, like their connection is actually helping Storm physically." Maria's eyes widened. "Is that possible?" "Medically speaking, it shouldn't be," Sarah replied slowly. "But we're witnessing it. The improvement isn't dramatic, but it's measurable, and it's dependent on their proximity." Sarah sat back against the kennel wall, the euthanasia paperwork forgotten beside her. 20 years of veterinary medicine hadn't prepared her for this. The clinical part of her brain insisted the improvement was coincidental, temporary, meaningless in the face of Storm's serious condition. But another part, perhaps the part that still mourned Rex after all these years, urged her to consider alternatives. "What are you thinking?" Maria asked, recognizing the conflict on Sarah's face. "I'm thinking we need more time," Sarah decided, standing up. "I need to speak with Richard." "He won't like changing the schedule," Maria warned. "Then he can fire me," Sarah replied with sudden resolve. "But I'm not euthanizing these dogs today, not when I've seen this." She gathered her unused supplies, her mind racing. There were studies about companion animals reducing stress in humans, improving health outcomes through emotional support. Could the same principle apply between animals? Could Atlas's presence be providing some kind of emotional stability that was translating to physical improvement for Storm? It seemed far-fetched, yet the evidence was right before her eyes. These dogs had survived abandonment together. They'd found their way to the temple, been brought to the shelter together. Through illness and recovery attempts, they'd remained inseparable. Sarah closed the kennel door gently, having made her decision. Richard Hayes might control the shelter's budget and policies, but in matters of medical judgment, she would stand her ground. These dogs deserved a chance, not just Storm to recover if possible, but both dogs to remain together for whatever time they had left. "Make a note in their file," she told Maria. "Euthanasia postponed pending further observation. And find me everything we have on their intake. I want to know exactly how they came to us and what condition they were in. There's more to their story than we know." As they walked away, Sarah glanced back one last time. Atlas had repositioned himself, his body curved around Storm's smaller form, his muzzle resting gently on his companion's neck. Whatever bond these two shared, it went beyond ordinary companionship, and Sarah was determined to understand it before making any irreversible decisions. The DNA results arrived at Sarah's personal email at 3 a.m., and what she saw made her heart race. Atlas and Storm were half-brothers, sharing the same father, a decorated K9 champion named Thunder, but it was the attached service records that truly stunned her. These weren't just any German shepherds. They were heroes with distinguished careers that should have guaranteed them a comfortable retirement. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through Atlas's file. 6 years of service with the Chicago Police Department, specializing in narcotics detection. His record showed 17 major drug busts, 2 officer rescues, and a Medal of Valor for taking a bullet meant for his handler during a warehouse raid. The incident had left him partially deaf in his right ear and with a distinctive scar across his shoulder, the same scar she'd noticed during his examination. Storm's record was equally impressive. 5 years with Chicago Search and Rescue, credited with finding 12 survivors in a collapsed apartment building during the 2019 earthquake. His specialty was locating victims in confined spaces, his smaller size allowing him to navigate debris that larger dogs couldn't. The file noted his exceptional bond with his handler and his uncanny ability to sense human distress even through thick concrete. Sarah's coffee grew cold as she discovered the connection between the brothers. They'd been part of the same joint task force during the infamous Riverside drug raid, the operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. Multiple officers injured, 2 civilian casualties, and allegations of corruption that rocked the department. Both dogs had been present that night, Atlas tracking the suspects while Storm searched for hostages. The morning sun was breaking through her office window when Sarah found the final piece of the puzzle, a newspaper article dated 6 months ago. K-9 heroes mysteriously disappear following internal affairs investigation. The article speculated that the dogs might have been hidden to prevent them from being used as evidence in the ongoing corruption probe. Armed with this information, Sarah marched into Richard Hayes's office without knocking. The shelter director looked up from his computer, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern as he saw the stack of papers in her hands. "These aren't just any dogs, Richard," Sarah said, slamming the files on his desk. "They're decorated service animals, heroes, and you want to euthanize them without even trying to contact their departments?" Richard leaned back in his chair, his face hardening. "Dr. Mitchell, we've been over this. Storm is dying and Atlas is showing signs of aggression. Our resources are limited." "Limited?" Sarah's voice rose. "Do you know what these dogs have done? Atlas took a bullet for his handler. Storm saved 12 people from certain death. They deserve better than being put down in some back room because it's convenient for your bottom line." "Sarah, please be reasonable." "No, you be reasonable." She pulled out her phone, showing him photos she'd taken of the barely visible service tags. "I've already contacted the Chicago PD. They had no idea their dogs were here. Someone deliberately removed their identification and dumped them." Richard's face paled. "You did what?" "And I've documented Storm's improvement when he's with Atlas. Their bond is keeping him alive. If you proceed with the euthanasia, I'll make sure every news outlet in the city knows that Haven Hill Shelter killed 2 American heroes without due diligence." The threat hung in the air between them. Richard stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're overstepping, Dr. Mitchell. These decisions aren't yours to make." "Then whose are they? Yours? The man who sees animals as line items on a budget?" Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "I became a vet to save lives, not to be an executioner for your convenience." Richard moved toward his office door. "You have until end of business today. After that, I'm calling the board. Either those dogs are put down, or you're looking for a new job." As he reached for the handle, Sarah played her final card. "I wonder what the board will think when they learn you've been falsifying intake records. Those dogs came in with tags, Richard. I have the security footage." Richard froze, his hand on the doorknob. "Maria saw you remove them," Sarah continued. "She kept copies of the original intake forms. The ones that show 2 highly trained service animals were logged as strays of unknown origin." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Richard turned, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "What do you want, Sarah?" 48 hours. Let me contact their handlers, find out what really happened. If I can't find a solution by then, I'll do it myself. No controversy, no media, but these dogs deserve a chance to go home." Richard's jaw clenched. 24 hours. And if word of this gets out before then, you're finished in this industry. I'll make sure of it. Sarah nodded, already heading for the door. 24 hours it is. Back in the treatment room, Sarah found Maria sitting with the dogs. Atlas had his head resting on Storm's flank, his eyes following Sarah as she entered. Storm's breathing remained steady as long as his brother stayed close. "I heard shouting," Maria said quietly. "Did you?" "We have 24 hours," Sarah replied, kneeling beside the dogs. She gently stroked Atlas's head, feeling the ridged scar tissue beneath his fur. "I need you to do something for me, Maria. Can you reach out to any contacts you have in Chicago, veterinary clinics, shelters, anyone who might know about these dogs?" Maria nodded. "I have a cousin who works at a clinic near the police academy. I'll call her." As Maria left to make her calls, Sarah examined Storm more closely. His breathing was stable, but his eyes held a profound sadness that went beyond physical pain. She'd seen that look before in dogs suffering from severe trauma, not illness, but heartbreak. "What happened to you two?" she whispered. Atlas responded by pressing closer to Storm, as if understanding her question. Sarah spent the next hours making calls. The Chicago PD's K-9 unit was shocked to hear about Atlas. He had been reported missing along with his handler, Detective John Bradley, who had abruptly retired after the Riverside incident. The search and rescue unit had a similar story about Storm disappeared without a trace after his handler transferred to another state. As the afternoon wore on, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every person connected to the Riverside raid had either retired, transferred, or gone missing. The dogs were the last loose ends in what appeared to be a massive cover-up. Sarah was reviewing the medical charts when her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a blocked number. "Dr. Mitchell, this is John Bradley. I heard you found my dog." Sarah's heart leaped. "Detective Bradley? Yes, Atlas is here, but don't say anything else on this line. I'm driving down from Wisconsin. I'll be there by morning, please." His voice broke. "Please, don't let them hurt my boy, or Storm. They were set up, both of them. I've been searching for months." "I'll protect them," Sarah promised, "but we don't have much time. I'll be there before dawn, and Doc Mitchell, thank you. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, but you're doing the right thing." As Sarah ended the call, she looked at the two dogs still curled together on the examination table. Atlas lifted his head, his intelligent eyes meeting hers with what seemed like understanding. For the first time, Sarah saw hope in those amber depths. She had less than 16 hours to save them both. The real fight was just beginning. The shelter fell into an uneasy quiet after hours, but Sarah remained in the treatment room with Atlas and Storm. She'd managed to convince the night staff to let her stay, claiming she needed to monitor Storm's condition. The truth was simpler. She didn't trust Richard not to act while she was gone. At midnight, Sarah administered another round of antibiotics to Storm. His fever had dropped slightly, but his breathing remained labored whenever Atlas moved away. She'd never seen anything like it. A physical condition that seemed directly tied to emotional proximity. As a veterinarian, she'd been trained to treat symptoms, not emotions, but these dogs were teaching her that sometimes the two were inseparable. "You're really fighting for him, aren't you?" she murmured to Atlas, who hadn't left his brother's side except for brief water breaks. The larger German shepherd looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, then gently licked Storm's ear. Storm's breathing immediately steadied. Around 2 a.m., Maria burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, you won't believe what I found out." She spread a collection of printed emails and photos across the exam table. "My cousin came through. She got these from a vet tech who used to work with the K-9 unit." Sarah studied the documents. They showed Atlas and Storm working together at various crime scenes, their handlers standing proudly beside them. In one photo, the brothers sat side by side, wearing their service vests, medals gleaming on their chests. "Look at this one." Maria pointed to an email dated 3 months ago. "It's from Detective Bradley to the department demanding to know what happened to Atlas. He says he never signed any retirement papers, never agreed to surrender his partner." Sarah's exhaustion vanished as she read through the correspondence. Bradley had been fighting the system, trying to locate Atlas while dealing with threats to his pension and reputation. The last email was from an anonymous source, warning him to drop it or lose everything. "There's more," Maria continued. I found a social media post from Storm's handler, Julie Martinez. She's been posting about him for months, asking if anyone has seen her dog. She says he was taken from her kennel while she was at work. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They were stolen. Both of them. The implications were staggering. Someone had deliberately removed two highly trained service dogs from their handlers, erased their records, and dumped them at a shelter where they'd likely be euthanized without questions. It was a perfect way to eliminate evidence. If the dogs couldn't testify, their handlers' claims would be dismissed as grief-driven fantasies. "We need to document everything," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "Photos, videos, their responses to commands. If this goes to court—" A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching the treatment room. Sarah checked her watch. 3:15 a.m. No one should be here at this hour. "Quick," she whispered to Maria. "Hide these papers." Maria stuffed the documents into a supply cabinet just as the door opened. Richard stood there with two men Sarah didn't recognize, both wearing security uniforms she'd never seen at the shelter. "Dr. Mitchell," Richard's voice was cold, "I thought we agreed you'd make your decision by morning." "It is morning," Sarah replied, moving to stand between the men and the dogs, "and Detective Bradley will be here soon." Richard's expression flickered. "You contacted the police." "I contacted their rightful owner. These dogs aren't strays, Richard. They're stolen property. Stolen police property." One of the security guards stepped forward. "Ma'am, we need you to step away from the animals." Atlas, sensing the tension, rose to his feet. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the first aggressive sound Sarah had heard from him. Storm tried to stand but collapsed back onto the table, whimpering. "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said firmly, "and neither are these dogs. Not until their handler arrives." Richard's facade cracked. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Sarah. These dogs saw things they shouldn't have, things that could ruin lives." "Whose lives, Richard? Yours." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the real police, not whatever private security firm you've hired." As she dialed, one of the guards lunged forward. Atlas exploded into action, placing himself between Sarah and the threat. His bark echoed off the walls. Sharp, authoritative, the bark of a trained police dog. The guard stumbled backward. "Control that animal," Richard shouted. "He's doing his job," Sarah shot back, "protecting the innocent, something you seem to have forgotten how to do." The standoff was interrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. Richard's face went pale. "You called them already?" "No," Maria said from behind them. "I did, 10 minutes ago, when I saw your car pull up with these goons." The security guards exchanged glances and began backing toward the door. Richard stood his ground for a moment longer, his face contorted with rage and fear. "This isn't over," he spat before following his hired muscle out of the room. As their footsteps faded, Sarah sank into a chair, her legs shaking. Atlas approached and laid his head in her lap, his guard duty temporarily suspended. Storm managed a weak tail wag from the table. "Thank you," Sarah whispered to Atlas. "You're still protecting people, aren't you?" The police arrived minutes later, real officers this time with proper badges and concerned expressions. Sarah showed them the documents Maria had gathered explaining the situation. The officers were particularly interested when they learned about Atlas and Storm's connection to the Riverside raid. "We've been investigating that case for months," Officer Rodriguez explained. "Internal Affairs suspected evidence tampering, but we could never prove it. If these dogs were at the scene—" "They were," Sarah confirmed, "and someone went to great lengths to make them disappear." As dawn approached, Sarah's phone rang. Detective Bradley was at the shelter's entrance. The desk clerk, not knowing about the night's events, had initially refused him entry. "Let him in," Sarah told Officer Rodriguez. "He needs to see his partner." Minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. John Bradley appeared in the doorway. a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes that suddenly lit up when he saw Atlas. "Tian!" he called out, using what was apparently Atlas's real name. The change in the German shepherd was instantaneous. His ears perked up, his tail began wagging furiously, and he let out a joyous bark that seemed to shake the walls. He bounded across the room, nearly knocking Bradley over in his enthusiasm. "Oh, buddy!" Bradley dropped to his knees, embracing his dog. "I'm so sorry. I've been looking everywhere for you." Sarah watched, tears streaming down her face, as Atlas licked Bradley's face, whining with pure joy. Even Storm seemed to perk up at the reunion, his tail thumping weakly against the table. Bradley looked up, his eyes wet. "Storm, is that you, boy?" He approached the table slowly, his hand extended. Storm sniffed his fingers and managed a weak lick. "Julie's going to be so happy," Bradley murmured. "She never gave up hope." Sarah stepped forward. "Detective, Storm is very sick. He needs his brother," Bradley finished. "They've always been like this, inseparable. After Riverside," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "things got complicated. Some people in the department didn't want certain facts coming to light. The dog saw everything that night. They knew who was really responsible for those civilian deaths." Officer Rodriguez leaned forward. "Are you saying the dogs were taken to suppress evidence?" Bradley nodded grimly. "Titan and Storm were trained to identify specific scents, including gunpowder residue and certain chemicals used in drug processing. They could have proven that the fatal shots came from someone on our side, not the suspects, someone high up in the department." The implications hung heavy in the air. Sarah realized she'd stumbled into something far bigger than animal rescue. This was about corruption, cover-ups, and the lengths people would go to protect their secrets. "What happens now?" Maria asked quietly. Bradley stood, his hand still resting on Titan's head. "Now we expose the truth. I've got files, evidence I've been gathering. With the dog safe, I can finally come forward." He looked at Sarah. "You saved more than their lives, Dr. Mitchell. You might have just helped crack the biggest corruption case in Chicago PD history." Sarah felt the weight of the moment. "But what about Storm? His condition?" "I know a specialist," Bradley interrupted. "Dr. Chen at the University Veterinary Hospital. She's worked with canine units for years. If anyone can help Storm, it's her." As if understanding that help was coming, Storm lifted his head. Titan immediately moved to his side, resuming his protective position. The brothers touched noses briefly, a gesture of comfort that transcended their training. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light through the treatment room windows. Sarah looked around at the gathered group. Police officers, Maria, Bradley, and the two German shepherds who had started this extraordinary chain of events. "Richard won't give up easily," she warned. "He's involved in this somehow." "We'll handle Richard," Officer Rodriguez assured her. "We've got enough to open an official investigation now." Bradley knelt beside Storm again, gently stroking his fur. "Can he travel?" "I'd like to get him to Dr. Chen as soon as possible." Sarah checked Storm's vitals one more time. "He's stable enough for transport, as long as Atlas, stays with him." "His name is Titan," Bradley smiled. "Atlas was his cover name, just like Storm was really named Thunder, Jr., after his father." As they prepared for transport, Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and elation. She'd spent the night fighting for these dogs' lives, never imagining she'd uncover a conspiracy in the process. But watching Titan hover protectively over his brother, she knew she'd made the right choice. "Satchel," Bradley said as they loaded Storm onto a special stretcher, "I can't thank you enough. You didn't just save my partner, you gave us a chance to make things right." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Just promise me they'll stay together, whatever happens." "You have my word," Bradley replied solemnly. "These brothers have been through enough separation. As the convoy prepared to leave for the university hospital, Sarah noticed Richard watching from his office window. His expression was unreadable, but she knew this wasn't over. There would be investigations, possibly trials, and certainly consequences for everyone involved. But for now, two heroic dogs were safe, reunited with people who loved them. Storm would get the treatment he needed, and Titan would remain by his side throughout the recovery. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, justice came with 4 paws and a loyal heart. Maria appeared beside her as they watched the vehicles drive away. "You did it, Sarah. You saved them." "We did it," Sarah corrected. "And something tells me this is just the beginning." She was right. The events of that night would trigger an investigation that would shake the Chicago Police Department to its core. But that's a story for another day. For now, 2 German Shepherd brothers were together again, their bond unbroken by the darkness they'd endured. Sarah jolted awake to the sound of her phone buzzing frantically on the nightstand. She had finally gone home after 3 days of virtually living at the shelter, monitoring Atlas and Storm's progress. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Maria's name flashed on the screen. "Sarah," Maria's voice was a panicked whisper, "you need to get back here now. Richard showed up with 2 men I've never seen before. They're heading toward the treatment room where the dogs are." Sarah was already pulling on jeans, phone tucked between ear and shoulder. "What do you mean? What kind of men?" "They're wearing security uniforms, but not our regular night guards. I don't recognize them. Richard told me to go home, but I hid in the supply closet instead. Something feels very wrong." "Call the police," Sarah instructed, grabbing her keys. "I'm 10 minutes away." "Already did. But hurry. They're carrying cases. I saw syringes." The line went dead. Sarah's heart hammered as she raced to her car. Over the past few days, Richard had grown increasingly agitated by her refusal to euthanize Atlas and Storm. She'd shown him the data, the miraculous improvement in Storm's condition when he remained with Atlas, but Richard had dismissed it as temporary and irrelevant. "The policy is clear, Dr. Mitchell," he'd said coldly. "These animals have consumed resources for months with no significant improvement. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills." As Sarah sped through the empty streets, her mind raced. Why would Richard return in the middle of the night? Who were these men? The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. She screeched into the shelter's parking lot and noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked near the service entrance. No markings, tinted windows. Killing the headlights, she parked around the corner and approached on foot, using her key to enter through the side door. The shelter was eerily quiet as she crept down the hallway, the only sound the distant hum of climate control systems. As she neared the treatment room where Atlas and Storm had been relocated, she heard male voices. "Just get it done," Richard's unmistakable tone carried through the partially open door. "I don't care which one goes first, but make it quick." "The big one's not going to be easy," an unfamiliar voice replied. "He knows something's up." Sarah peered around the doorframe. Richard stood with his back to her while 2 burly men in generic security uniforms approached the large kennel where Atlas and Storm were housed. One man was preparing a syringe, while the other held what looked like catch poles. Atlas was already on his feet, standing protectively over Storm, who had improved dramatically but was still weak. A low, warning growl emanated from Atlas's throat, the first aggressive sound Sarah had heard from him. "That's far enough," Sarah announced, stepping into the room. All 3 men whirled to face her. "What exactly is going on here, Richard?" Richard's face contorted with anger. "This is none of your concern, Dr. Mitchell. You were instructed to complete this task days ago. Since you refused, I've arranged for it to be handled appropriately." "By unlicensed personnel in the middle of the night?" Sarah kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That's a violation of at least 3 state regulations. Only licensed veterinarians can administer euthanasia. These dogs are being transferred, not euthanized," Richard claimed smoothly, "to a specialized facility." At 2 a.m. without paperwork? Sarah moved toward the dogs. I don't think so. Nobody touches these animals without proper documentation and authorization. One of the security men took a step toward her. Lady, you need to leave. This is shelter business. Atlas's growl deepened. His eyes locked on the approaching man. I wouldn't, Sarah warned. That dog was trained by the Chicago Police Department. He knows when someone's threatening his handler. It was a guess based on Atlas's bearing and training signals she'd observed, but it hit home. The man hesitated, looking to Richard for direction. Don't be ridiculous, Richard scoffed. These are street dogs, nothing more. Are they? Sarah challenged. That's not what their DNA tests and service tattoos suggest. Why are you so determined to get rid of these particular dogs, Richard? What are you afraid they might reveal? Richard's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his composure that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Something was very wrong here, beyond shelter politics or budget concerns. You've been looking into their background, Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. I have, and I've found some interesting connections, like the fact that their service numbers link them to the Chicago PD and search and rescue. Units that were involved in the Riverside warehouse raid last year, the one that's under investigation for evidence tampering and corruption. Sarah was connecting dots in real time, the picture becoming clearer with each passing moment. The tension in the room shifted palpably. The security men exchanged glances. You're out of your depth, Dr. Mitchell, Richard said coldly. These are dangerous dogs with behavioral issues. They attacked their previous owners. The paperwork was very clear. Paperwork you falsified, came Maria's voice from the doorway. She held up her phone, recording the confrontation. I kept copies of the original intake forms, the ones that noted they were wearing service tags when they arrived. Richard's face darkened with rage. You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you're interfering with? The larger security man suddenly pulled something from his jacket. Not a weapon, but a police badge. Richard Hayes, step away from the animals. For a moment, everyone froze in confusion. Chicago Internal Affairs. The man identified himself, badge clearly visible now. These dogs are evidence in an ongoing investigation. We've been tracking their movements since they disappeared 3 months ago. Richard lunged toward the kennel, pulling a syringe from his pocket. They won't testify against anyone. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Atlas launched himself at Richard, not attacking, but using his body weight to knock the man away from Storm. The syringe clattered to the floor. The undercover officer tackled Richard from behind while his partner secured the fallen syringe as evidence. Sarah rushed to the kennel, checking that neither dog was injured in the chaos. Storm was trembling but unharmed, while Atlas stood vigilant, his attention divided between protecting his brother and watching the ongoing struggle. More officers poured into the room, responding to the silent alarm Maria had triggered. Richard was handcuffed and read his rights, his face a mask of cold fury. Dr. Mitchell, one of the officers approached her. I'm Captain Rodriguez from Internal Affairs. We need to speak with you about these dogs and what you've discovered. Sarah nodded, still shaken. They're not just any dogs, are they? Rodriguez shook her head grimly. No. They're key witnesses to a corruption case that goes deep into the department. These dogs were at the Riverside raid when 2 civilians were killed. The official report claimed the suspect shot first, but there were rumors that corrupt officers fired the fatal shots and planted evidence. And these dogs saw it happen, Sarah realized. They could identify the shooters? German Shepherds can distinguish individual scents and recognize specific people even months later, Rodriguez confirmed. These dogs were deliberately stolen from their handlers and sentenced to death to eliminate that evidence. Several officers involved in the conspiracy have been under surveillance, including Richard Hayes, who has financial connections to the primary suspects. As the officers secured the scene, Maria joined Sarah by the kennel, both women still processing the night's revelations. How did you know? Maria asked. About their police background? Sarah stroked Atlas's head through the kennel bars. I didn't know for certain, but everything about them spoke of training, their bearing, their responses to commands, even how they worked together. And when I saw the partial tattoo under Atlas's ear during his exam, I started researching missing police dogs. Captain Rodriguez approached again. We need to transfer these dogs to a secure facility immediately. There are others involved in this conspiracy who might try to finish what Hayes started. Storm isn't strong enough for transport, Sarah objected. He's still recovering. We don't have a choice, Doctor. These dogs aren't safe here. Sarah made a quick decision. Then I'm going with them. Storm needs continuous medical attention, and Atlas won't cooperate if he's separated from either Storm or someone he trusts. Rodriguez seemed about to object, then nodded. Fine. We have a veterinary facility at the training academy. You can continue their care there under protection. As they prepared for transport, Sarah watched the brothers closely. Atlas remained vigilant, his body positioned to shield Storm from the strangers in the room. Storm, showing more strength than he had in days, stayed close to his protector, his eyes tracking the commotion around them. These dogs had survived abandonment on the streets, attempted murder at the shelter, and now stood at the center of what appeared to be a massive corruption case. Their loyalty to each other had not only kept them alive, but might now bring justice to those who had tried to silence them. The transport vehicles arrived within half an hour, unmarked vans with specialized equipment for moving the dogs safely. Sarah helped secure Storm on a cushioned stretcher while Atlas was led with a special harness that allowed him to remain close to his brother. They'll be evaluated by our K9 specialist, Rodriguez explained as they loaded the dogs. If Storm recovers sufficiently, both dogs could potentially be reunited with their original handlers. Sarah felt a pang at the thought of saying goodbye to these extraordinary animals, but pushed it aside. What mattered was their safety and recovery. She climbed into the van beside them, her medical bag clutched tightly. We'll need statements from both you and Miss Sanchez, Rodriguez continued. Everything you observed about Hayes' behavior, the dog's condition upon arrival, any suspicious circumstances. Maria nodded solemnly. I'll tell you everything I know. As the van doors closed, Sarah settled beside the dogs for the journey. Atlas watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, some of the tension finally leaving his powerful frame now that they were moving away from danger. You're safe now, she told them softly. Both of you. Storm, seeming to understand, rested his head on Atlas's foreleg and closed his eyes. Atlas remained alert, a guardian even in transit, his loyalty undiminished by the trauma they'd endured. Sarah realized that in trying to save these dogs, she'd stumbled into something much larger than a shelter decision about euthanasia. These brothers weren't just survivors, they were witnesses, protectors of truth, their bond unbreakable even when facing death. As the van pulled away from the shelter, Sarah wondered what other revelations awaited them. The journey that had begun with a difficult Monday morning decision had transformed into something she never could have anticipated, a fight for justice that transcended species, bound together by the most fundamental bonds of loyalty and love. The University Veterinary Hospital's emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos as Storm was rushed in on a stretcher. Dr. Chen, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair and intense eyes, took command immediately. Sarah watched as the specialist team surrounded Storm, their movements precise and urgent. His temperature's dropping, one of the technicians called out. Heart rate is erratic. Titan refused to leave his brother's side, planting himself firmly next to the examination table. When an orderly tried to move him, he let out a warning growl that made everyone step back. Let him stay, Dr. Chen ordered, studying the brothers with keen interest. I've seen this before with bonded pairs. The separation might do more harm than good. Sarah felt her chest tighten as Storm's breathing became increasingly labored. Despite all their efforts, despite the miraculous reunion with Bradley, it seemed they might lose him after all. The monitors beat frantically as Storm's vital signs continued to deteriorate. "We're losing him," a nurse announced, her voice tight with professional concern. Dr. Chin worked swiftly, administering medications and calling out orders, but Storm's body seemed to be shutting down. His eyes rolled back and his breathing became shallow gasps. Titan sensed the crisis. He rose on his hind legs, placing his front paws on the table, and began to howl, a mournful, haunting sound that echoed through the emergency room. The sound carried such raw grief that several staff members had to turn away, tears in their eyes. "Tighten down," Bradley commanded gently, but the dog ignored him, pressing his nose against Storm's still form. Then something extraordinary happened. As Titan's howl faded, he began to lick Storm's face with desperate intensity. He whined, nudged his brother's head, and then did something that made everyone in the room freeze. He lay down beside Storm on the table, curling his larger body protectively around his brother's failing form. "The heart rate's stabilizing," a technician whispered in disbelief. Dr. Chin leaned forward, watching the monitors intently. "Keep that dog exactly where he is," she ordered. "Don't anyone move." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the monitors. Gradually, impossibly, Storm's vital signs began to improve. His breathing deepened, his heart rate steadied, and color returned to his gums. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Chen murmured. "It's as if Titan's presence is literally willing him to live." Sarah moved closer to Bradley, who stood rigid with tension. "They really are connected, aren't they?" she said softly. Bradley nodded, his eyes never leaving the dogs. "After the warehouse shooting, Titan wouldn't eat for days. He just lay by the door of Storm's kennel at the training facility. The vets thought we might lose him to grief. It wasn't until they were reunited that he started to recover." Dr. Chin began a thorough examination while Titan remained pressed against Storm. "There's significant inflammation in his lungs," she reported. "But what's interesting is that his cortisol levels are off the charts. This isn't just a respiratory infection, it's severe stress-induced illness." "Stress from being separated?" Sarah asked. "Possibly. Or trauma from whatever they witnessed before being abandoned." Dr. Chin gestured to the scars visible on both dogs. "These animals have been through something terrible. The body keeps the score, as they say." As the immediate crisis passed, Dr. Chin ordered a series of tests. Bradley sat in a nearby chair, his hand resting on Titan's back, while Sarah paced the waiting area. Maria had returned to the shelter to handle the morning routine and field the inevitable questions about the night's events. Hours passed. Storm remained stable but weak, with Titan refusing to leave his side even for food or water. Finally, Dr. Chin emerged from the treatment room with a concerned expression. "We need to talk," she said, leading Sarah and Bradley to her office. "Storm's condition is more complicated than we initially thought." She pulled up X-rays and test results on her computer. "See these shadows in his lungs? They're not from infection. They're scar tissue from smoke inhalation. And these marks here," she pointed to several areas, "those are consistent with chemical exposure." Bradley's face darkened. "The warehouse fire. During the raid." "There's more," Dr. Chin continued. "His blood work shows traces of an industrial accelerant. Whatever happened in that warehouse, these dogs were exposed to something toxic. Storm, being smaller, took the brunt of it." Sarah felt sick. "Is that why he's been declining so rapidly?" "Partly, but I believe the psychological trauma of separation triggered a cascade of physical symptoms. His immune system was already compromised, and the stress pushed him over the edge." "Can you help him?" Bradley asked, his voice rough. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. "I can treat the physical symptoms, but healing trauma, that's more complicated. He needs stability, safety, and most importantly, he needs his brother. Their bond isn't just emotional, it's become a survival mechanism." As they discussed treatment options, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Richard's been arrested. Police found evidence linking him to the warehouse operation. He was paid to make the dogs disappear." Sarah showed the message to Bradley, who nodded grimly. I suspected as much. Richard Hayes was mentioned in some of the encrypted communications I intercepted. He was part of the cleanup crew. There's something else you should know, Dr. Chen said, pulling up another file. I ran both dogs' identification chips through our database. Someone tried to deactivate them, but they did a sloppy job. I was able to recover the original registration data. She turned the screen toward them. Both dogs were officially listed as deceased 3 months ago. Death certificates were filed, insurance claims paid out. On paper, these dogs don't exist anymore. The implications were staggering. Someone had gone to enormous lengths to erase Titan and Storm from official records, suggesting a conspiracy that reached deep into the system. We need to get them somewhere safe, Bradley said. If the people behind this realize the dogs are alive, they can stay here, Dr. Chen offered. We have a secure wing for witness protection animals. Yes, that's a real thing, she added, seeing Sarah's surprised expression. You'd be amazed how often animals become key witnesses in criminal cases. As they made arrangements for the dog's care, Storm stirred on the examination table, his eyes open, focusing on Titan, who immediately began licking his face. Storm's tail gave a weak wag, the first sign of real improvement. Look at that, Dr. Chen smiled. He's fighting back. But their relief was short-lived. Bradley's phone rang, and his expression darkened as he listened to the caller. That was my contact at Internal Affairs, he said after hanging up. Richard Hayes was found dead in his cell an hour ago. Apparent suicide. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They're cleaning house. Which means we're running out of time, Bradley replied. Once they realize Hayes didn't finish the job, they'll come looking for the dogs. Dr. Chen moved quickly. I'll have them transferred to our secure facility immediately. We have protocols for this kind of situation. As they prepared for the transfer, Sarah knelt beside the examination table where the brothers lay. Titan looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and she felt he understood everything that was happening. You saved him, she whispered to Titan. Just like you've always done. Storm lifted his head slightly, his brown eyes meeting hers. Despite his weakness, there was a spark there, a will to live that hadn't been present before. The secure transport team arrived within minutes, equipped with specialized vehicles and armed guards. As they loaded the dogs onto a cushioned platform, keeping them together, Sarah felt tears welling up. She'd known these dogs for less than 48 hours, but they changed her life forever. Will I see them again? She asked Bradley. He squeezed her shoulder. When this is over, I promise. You're part of their story now, Dr. Mitchell. Part of our fight for justice. As the transport vehicle pulled away, Sarah stood with Dr. Chen and watched until it disappeared around the corner. The morning sun was now high in the sky, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot. What happens now? Sarah asked. Dr. Chen turned to her with a determined expression. Now we make sure these brave dogs survive to tell their story, whatever they witnessed in that warehouse, whatever secrets they carry. It's worth killing for, which means it's worth fighting for. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She'd started this journey trying to save 2 dogs from euthanasia. Now she was part of something much bigger, a fight against corruption that had already claimed human lives and nearly destroyed 2 noble animals who'd done nothing but serve faithfully. As she drove back to the shelter, Sarah knew her life would never be the same. But watching Titan's devotion to Storm, witnessing their unbreakable bond, she also knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could unravel the largest webs of deceit. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Sarah was no longer just a veterinarian. She was a witness, a protector, and now a crucial part of the justice these dogs deserved. 3 weeks passed in tense anticipation. Storm slowly regained his strength under Dr. Chen's care, with Titan never leaving his side. The secure facility, hidden beneath the university's research wing, became their sanctuary. Sarah visited daily, bringing treats and spending hours documenting their recovery. Evidence that might prove crucial in the upcoming investigation. Then came the breakthrough no one expected. Detective Bradley burst into Dr. Chin's office one morning, his face flushed with excitement. "Storm's collar," he said breathlessly. "The one he was wearing when you found him. Where is it?" Sarah retrieved it from the evidence locker where she'd stored all the dog's belongings. It was a standard K9 unit collar, worn and frayed, with Storm's name barely visible on the faded tag. "Julie, the Storm's handler just remembered something," Bradley explained, carefully examining the collar. "During specialized training, they taught Storm to secure evidence by swallowing small items or hiding them in his gear. Watch this." He held the collar up to the light, then ran his fingers along the inside seam. There was a barely noticeable bump. Using a small knife, he carefully opened the stitching and extracted a micro SD card wrapped in waterproof material. "My God," Sarah whispered. "He's been carrying evidence this whole time?" Bradley's hand shook as he inserted the card into Dr. Chin's computer. The screen filled with video files, all dated from the night of the warehouse raid. "These are from Storm's body camera," Bradley explained. "All K9 units wear them during operations, but the footage from that night supposedly got corrupted." They watched in stunned silence as the first video played. The shaky footage showed Storm moving through a dark warehouse, his handler's voice giving quiet commands. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. The camera swung wildly as Storm ran toward the sound, revealing something that made them all gasp. The fatal shots that killed 2 civilians hadn't come from the suspects. They'd come from behind police lines, from officers who were supposed to be providing backup. "That's Deputy Chief Morrison," Bradley identified, pointing to a figure in tactical gear. "And that's Sergeant Williams. They're both on administrative leave pending investigation." The next video was even more damning. It showed the aftermath of the shooting, with Morrison and Williams planting weapons near the bodies of the dead civilians. Their voices were clearly audible, discussing how to alter the crime scene to support their version of events. "We need to get rid of the dogs," Morrison's voice said on the recording. "They were too close. If anyone runs scent tests—" "I'll handle it," Williams replied. "I know a guy at that shelter, Hayes. He'll make them disappear." Sarah felt sick. They planned to kill them from the beginning. Bradley nodded grimly. "Storm must have sensed something was wrong. Julie said he was acting strange after the raid. Wouldn't let anyone near his collar. When they came for him, he probably knew they weren't taking him for a routine checkup." Dr. Chin had been silent throughout the viewing. Now she spoke up. "This explains Storm's condition. It wasn't just physical trauma. He was literally carrying the weight of this evidence, knowing people wanted him dead for it." "But why didn't he get sick immediately?" Sarah asked. "Why wait until they were at the shelter?" "Survival instinct," Bradley explained. "These dogs are trained to complete their mission no matter what. Storm held himself together until he felt safe enough to let go. When you separated them at the shelter, he thought he'd failed to protect the evidence, failed to stay with his brother. That's when his body started shutting down." They continued through the files, finding more videos, audio recordings, and even thermal imaging that showed the real sequence of events during the raid. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. "We need to get this to Internal Affairs immediately," Bradley said, ejecting the SD card. "But first, we need to make copies, multiple copies." As they worked to secure the evidence, Sarah's phone rang. It was Maria, her voice panicked. "Sarah, there are men here at the shelter. They are asking about the German shepherds. They have badges, but something doesn't feel right." "Don't tell them anything," Sarah warned. "I'm calling the real police." But even as she dialed, Bradley's phone buzzed with an urgent message. "The transport team just reported being followed. Someone knows the dogs are alive." Dr. Chin moved quickly to her computer, activating the facility's security protocols. "We have about 15 minutes before they figure out where we are," she said calmly. "There's an emergency exit through the old research tunnels. It leads to the parking structure 3 blocks away." They gathered the essential evidence and prepared to move the dogs. Storm was still weak but could walk with support. Titan, sensing the urgency, stayed close to his brother, ready to support him if needed. As they entered the tunnels, the sound of forced entry echoed from the main facility. Heavy footsteps and shouting indicated their pursuers had arrived. "This way," Dr. Chin whispered, leading them through a maze of passages. The tunnels were part of the university's old steam system, converted for emergency evacuation after 9/11. Few people knew they existed. Storm stumbled several times, but Titan was always there, pressing against him, keeping him upright. The bond between the brothers had never been more evident or more crucial. They emerged in the parking structure to find Bradley's contact from Internal Affairs waiting with an unmarked van. Captain Rodriguez, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, took one look at the group and understood immediately. "Get in," she ordered. "We've got safe house prepared." As they drove away, Sarah watched through the rear window as several black SUVs converged on the veterinary building. They'd escaped just in time. The safe house turned out to be a farm 2 hours outside the city, owned by a retired police officer who specialized in protecting witnesses, both human and animal. The property was secure, with surveillance systems and trained guards. That evening, as Storm rested with his head in Titan's lap, Captain Rodriguez reviewed the evidence they'd recovered. Her expression grew darker with each video. "This is bigger than we thought," she said finally. "Morrison and Williams weren't acting alone. This goes all the way to the top. The warehouse wasn't just a drug raid. It was a cover for stealing evidence from a federal investigation. The civilians who died were informants about to testify against several high-ranking officials." Bradley nodded. "And our dogs were the only witnesses they couldn't bribe or threaten." "Which makes them the most important witnesses we have," Rodriguez continued. "This evidence, combined with their ability to identify the shooters by scent, could bring down the entire corrupt network." Sarah stroked Storm's head gently. "But testifying means putting them at risk again." "Not necessarily," Rodriguez smiled. "Thanks to you, Dr. Mitchell, we have everything documented. The videos, the medical records showing their deliberate abandonment, the evidence of attempted euthanasia. It all builds a case that doesn't require the dogs to be physically present in court. They've already testified through their actions and Storm's hidden evidence." Over the next few days, the story began to break. News outlets received anonymous tips about corruption in the Chicago Police Department. The evidence from Storm's collar was leaked to trusted journalists. Public outrage grew as details emerged about the murdered informants and the attempted cover-up. Morrison and Williams were arrested, along with 12 other officers involved in the conspiracy. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that had been operating for years, with the warehouse raid being just the tip of the iceberg. Through it all, Sarah stayed with the dogs at the safe house, helping with Storm's continued recovery. She watched as the brothers slowly began to relax, their hypervigilance fading as they realized they were truly safe. One morning, about a week after their escape, Sarah witnessed something that brought tears to her eyes. Storm, now much stronger, initiated play with Titan for the first time. The 2 dogs chased each other around the farm's enclosed yard, their barks of joy echoing across the fields. "I've never seen him like this," Bradley said, joining Sarah on the porch. "Even before everything happened, Storm was always the serious one, always on duty." "He's finally free," Sarah replied. "They both are." As the legal proceedings continued, more truth emerged. The corrupt officers had been selling seized drugs and weapons, using the K-9 unit's reputation for accuracy to validate their false reports. When Storm and Titan's keen senses threatened to expose their operation, they'd decided to eliminate the dogs. Richard Hayes, the shelter director, had been paid $50,000, 0 cents, to ensure the dogs were euthanized quickly and quietly. His suicide had been staged to prevent him from testifying. The revelation that shocked everyone came during Morrison's interrogation. Desperate to cut a deal, he revealed that there were other K-9 units targeted for elimination, dogs who had witnessed various crimes across multiple jurisdictions. Storm and Titan's survival had disrupted a nationwide network of corrupt law enforcement officials. "You saved more than just these two," Captain Rodriguez told Sarah during one of her visits to the farm. "Thanks to the evidence they preserved, we've been able to protect dozens of other K-9 officers who were at risk." As the weeks turned into months, the farm became a permanent home for Storm and Titan. Bradley officially adopted both dogs, retiring from active duty to ensure their safety. The property was transformed into a sanctuary for retired police dogs, with Sarah consulting on their medical care. The day the final verdicts came down, guilty on all counts for the primary conspirators. Sarah sat with the brothers under a large oak tree. Storm leaned against her legs while Titan rested his head in her lap. They were different dogs now, healthier, happier, free from the burden of secrets they'd carried. "You did it, boys," she whispered. "You brought them all to justice." Titan looked up at her with those wise amber eyes, and she could have sworn he understood every word. Storm nudged her hand, seeking attention, his tail wagging contentedly. As the sun set over the farm, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. What had started as a routine euthanasia appointment had uncovered one of the largest corruption scandals in law enforcement history. But more than that, it had proven the power of the bond between two brothers who refused to be separated, even in the face of death. Their loyalty to each other had saved not only their own lives, but had brought justice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. The truth had finally been revealed, carried in the collar of a brave German shepherd who knew that some secrets were worth protecting, no matter the cost. 6 months after the trial's conclusion, the farm had transformed into the Haven Heroes Sanctuary, a peaceful refuge for retired service dogs. Sarah stood on the wraparound porch, watching as Storm and Titan led a group of newly arrived K-9 veterans around the property, their tails wagging with newfound purpose. "They've become the welcoming committee," Bradley chuckled, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Every time we get new residents, those two take it upon themselves to show them around." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "They understand what these dogs have been through, the trauma, the abandonment, the betrayal by people they trusted." The sanctuary now housed 15 retired police and military dogs, each with their own story of service and sacrifice. Sarah had left her position at the shelter to become the full-time veterinarian for Haven Heroes, finding more fulfillment in this work than she'd ever imagined possible. "I got a call from Julie this morning," Bradley said, referring to Storm's original handler. "She's finally ready to visit. The guilt's been eating at her. She still blames herself for not protecting Storm better." Sarah nodded understanding. The trauma affected everyone involved. "Has she been getting help?" "She started therapy last month. Said she needed to work through her own issues before she could face Storm again." That afternoon, Julie Martinez arrived, her hands trembling as she stepped out of her car. Storm, who had been napping in the sun, suddenly lifted his head, his ears perking forward. For a moment he remained still, as if not believing his senses. Then recognition dawned. Storm let out a joyous bark and sprinted across the yard, his previous health issues now just a distant memory. Julie fell to her knees as Storm barreled into her, covering her face with kisses while whimpering with pure happiness. "I'm so sorry," Julie sobbed, burying her face in Storm's fur. "I should have fought harder for you. I should have known they were lying when they said you ran away." Titan approached more slowly, sitting beside Bradley, but watching the reunion with what Sarah could only describe as approval. The larger German Shepherd had become Storm's protector and guardian, but he seemed to understand that this moment belonged to Storm and his first partner. "He never forgot you," Sarah told Julie later, as they sat on the porch watching the dogs play. "Even when he was sick, even when he thought he was dying, he kept fighting. I think part of him was waiting for you to find him." Julie wiped her eyes. "The department told me he was hit by a car during the chaos after the raid. They even showed me fake veterinary records. I should have known better." Storm was too smart to run into traffic. "They were thorough in their deception," Bradley said grimly, "but they underestimated the bond between handlers and their partners, just like they underestimated the bond between Storm and Titan." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the farm, Sarah reflected on how far they'd all come. The corruption scandal had led to reforms throughout the Chicago Police Department and beyond. New protocols were established to protect K-9 officers, including mandatory GPS tracking and regular wellness checks by independent veterinarians. The Haven Heroes Sanctuary had become a model for other organizations, demonstrating how retired service dogs could find purpose and peace after their years of duty. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing them to expand their facilities and help more animals in need. "We're getting a new resident next week," Sarah announced, "a military dog from Afghanistan. Lost his handler to an IED and hasn't trusted anyone since." Bradley nodded thoughtfully. "Think Storm and Titan can work their magic on him?" "If anyone can reach a traumatized dog, it's those two," Sarah smiled. "They've become our best therapy team." As if understanding they were being discussed, Storm and Titan trotted over, taking their usual positions, Storm leaning against Sarah's legs while Titan rested his head on Bradley's knee. The four of them sat in comfortable silence, watching the other dogs explore the property. "You know what amazes me most," Julie said softly, "how they've forgiven. After everything humans put them through, they still trust, still love, still serve." "That's the thing about dogs," Sarah replied. "They don't hold on to hatred or seek revenge. They just want to love and be loved in return." Later that evening, after Julie had left with promises to return regularly, Sarah performed her nightly rounds. She found Storm and Titan in their favorite spot, a raised platform overlooking the entire farm, where they could keep watch over their new pack. Storm's breathing was steady and strong, a far cry from the labored gasps that had once threatened his life. The scars on both dogs had faded, though they would never completely disappear. But scars, Sarah had learned, were simply proof of survival, markers of battles won. "Good night, boys," she whispered, running her hands through their fur. "Thank you for teaching me what true courage looks like." As she walked back to the main house, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with a life-or-death decision in a sterile euthanasia room had led to something beautiful, a place where broken spirits could heal, where loyalty was honored, and where the bond between brothers had changed countless lives. The Haven Heroes Sanctuary stood as a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the unbreakable spirit of those who serve. And at its heart were two German shepherds who had refused to give up on each other, proving that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come from simply holding on when everything seems lost. In saving Storm and Titan, Sarah had discovered her true calling, and in return they had saved her too, showing her that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found in the unwavering loyalty of a dog's heart. To those of you who've served, sacrificed, and seen too many goodbyes, this story is for you. Like many of us who watched friends depart for Vietnam or waited for letters from overseas, these two German shepherd brothers embodied the loyalty we cherish most. Storm and Titan represent every partnership forged in service, the police officer and their K-9 partner, the soldier and their battle buddy, the bonds that kept us alive when everything else failed. Their story reminds us that true friendship doesn't end with retirement papers or a folded flag. When Storm lay dying, abandoned by the very system he'd served, his brother Titan refused to give up, just as we never gave up on each other in our darkest hours. For those who've felt forgotten by the institutions they faithfully served, who've wondered if their sacrifices still matter, remember this: loyalty never dies. These dogs proved that the love between brothers, whether born of blood or forged in service, can overcome any betrayal. Their courage in preserving the truth, even while facing death, speaks to the heart of what our generation holds dear: honor, duty, and the unshakable belief that doing right matters, no matter the cost.